When you look at the critical issues facing our world, what do you see? We see breakthrough medicines getting to patients in record time. We see harnessing natural gas, unleashing the promise of clean energy. We see engineers simulating the future to improve today. At Emerson, when issues become inspiration, focusing core strengths to create a better world isn't just responsibility. Emerson, consider it solved. When you look at critical issues facing our world, what do you see? We see 1 billion more people breathing free. We see access to global norm, not the exception. We see homes staying cooler without the planet getting warmer. At Emerson, when issues become core strengths to create a better world isn't just a result, it's Emerson. Consider it solved. We see harnessing natural gas, unleashing the clean energy. At Emerson, when issues become inspiration, creating a better world isn't just a result, it's a responsibility. Emerson, consider it solved. We see engineers simulating the future to improve today. At Emerson, when issues become inspiration, creating a better world isn't just a result, ability. Emerson, consider it solved. We see breakthrough medicines getting to patients in record time. When issues become inspiration, creating a better world isn't just a result, it's a responsibility. Emerson, consider it solved. We see access to fresh food being the global norm. At Emerson, when issues become inspiration, creating a better world isn't just a result, it's a responsibility. Emerson, consider it solved. We see heating breakthroughs clearing the air for billions. At Emerson, become inspiration. Creating a better world isn't just a result, it's a responsibility. Consider it solved. We see homes staying cooler without the planet getting warmer. At issues become inspiration. Creating a better world isn't just a result, it's a responsibility. Emerson, consider it solved.
One of the approaches that KKR takes in Asia is to be a solutions provider to stakeholders in the marketplace. As the private equity industry has evolved and KKR has evolved, what we've done is we've created different tools to help our competitive advantage in the market, as well as the way in which we engage with our portfolio companies. We bring deep industry specialization, deep operational expertise, and a global platform that's really suited to helping these local companies grow. One of the key tenets of our strategy in Asia has been from day one, really localizing the investment teams. Asia is not one big market. It's a collection of 8 or 10 different locally to hire local executives and build our business in each country around a talented team of locals. In the last 30 years, the world economy has globalized dramatically. A global network is critically important. The businesses that we're investing in Asia, whether it's China, India, or Vietnam, these companies are looking to the potential. Our ability to provide access to customers, distribution, know-how from around the world is a huge advantage as we deal with these companies. The heart of what we do is we take a long-term, we're not worried about the quarter-to-quarter earnings. We're really focused on understanding what's going to drive sustainable value creation businesses over 3, 5, 10 years. It's a really dynamic part of the world with some of the highest GDP growth rates we see. So our opportunity is to be partners with great local entrepreneurs. Exciting investment themes in Asia really revolve around the domestic consumption trends. You have around 60% of the global population living in Asia today. Some incredibly interesting demographics in Southeast Asia revolving around the growing middle class, rising disposable incomes, and consumer power. In that context, when you think about industries like consumer products, retail, and healthcare, there are significant opportunities for investment. Private equity has always been around providing solutions to our partners. So our core business is really providing capital teams and industry-leading franchises to help them really think about the long-term opportunity to improve their business.
Fluffy? Fluffy? Fluffy!
Good thing you can now view your bills online. Sign up for paperless bills.
Every brand has a goal. To be this or that for the consumer. To do this or that for its audience. To fix this. To grow that. To build from scratch. We take a holistic approach in solving marketing challenges and use a variety of channels to reach consumers in need. Experience is the relationship we build between the audience and the brand. The integration of channels is even relevant. This approach we call integrated marketing experience. Team Asia brings out the best in branding and design, events and activation, content marketing, digital marketing, and video production. Has the best players in the game, armed with the knowledge to implement a strong game plan that fits your goals. A new brand? Are you creating a positive brand impression? If you're looking for ways to grow your brand, the first order of business is to choose a team of experts. We are Team Asia, and this is how we do it.
We have a lot of plans. Ang dami namin expansion plan. Tapos merong pandemic. Pero na-realize namin na we have to continue. I really felt that na yung solution namin is something na kakailanganin ng mga MSMEs. Alam namin mahirapan sila. Kasi nakita namin sa data na mga Filipino MSMEs is focused lang locally. Yung pinakamerkado nila, dito lang sila nagbebenta sa Pilipinas. At yung channel nila, the way they sell in physical store. Tapos dito lang locally sa Pilipinas. So nung nag-lockdown, alam namin na wala silang bebentahan. Their business will stop. We saw a lot of solutions na nag-o-off. Pero for us, bringing them online is not enough. Will not just make you online, but will also make you trying logistics companies sa Pilipinas. Pero nung nakausap namin yung FedEx, alam mo, iba yung gaan ng loob sa unang mo pa lang silang makausap. Naintindihan nila yung ginagawa namin. Ang gusto ko sa kanila that they're willing to work with us na isang start and we have a certain way of doing things. Pero sila, they willing to adjust or listen to that. Kasi ang pagpapadala ng produkto mula sa Pilipinas at sa ibang bansa, hindi siya madali. Kung wala sila, mahirapan kami na magpadala ng mga produkto sa ibang bansa. I'm proud of our Filipino products. I'm proud of Filipino entrepreneurs who continually makes them. I'm proud of our company, Easy Fulfill, entrepreneurs make their products global.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the 9th Arangkada Philippines Forum Foreign Investment in the Post-Pandemic Philippines. Our program will begin in a few minutes. We encourage everyone to actively participate today, especially during the open forum and the Q&A. Should you have any questions to raise, kindly type it in the Q&A box. You may find the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom platform. Our speakers and panelists would be glad to answer them given enough time. Should you have other questions after the forum, please do send them over at forum@arangkadaphilippines.com. We invite you to tweet about the event by using the event hashtag Arangkada Forum 2020. We also invite you to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Arangkada Philippines. Follow us on Twitter at ArangkadaPH, and please also connect with us on LinkedIn by looking for Arangkada Philippines. Finally, we would like everybody to answer a few poll questions that we will be flashing on the screen. We highly value your feedback. First question, does the Philippines need foreign investment? Second poll, does the Philippines receive enough foreign investment? Third question, are competing ASEAN countries more successful in attracting foreign investment? Fourth question, is the Philippines an attractive location for foreign investors? Fifth question, do the Filipino people want foreign investment? Our sixth question is, do the Filipino elite want foreign investment? Our seventh question, does the current Philippine government want foreign investment? Eighth question, does the government promote Invest Philippines adequately? Ninth question. Do you choose the Philippines? And our last question, should constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership be removed? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that ends the poll. Thank you very much to everybody that participated in answering those questions. Please remain on your screens as we are about to begin the program in just a few minutes. At this point, we would like to thank those who made this forum possible. We would like to thank our platinum sponsors, Emerson, ICTSI, KKR, Meralco, and Team Asia. Our gold sponsors, Converge, FedEx, First Philippine Holdings, Royal Cargo, and Pilipinas Shell. Our silver sponsors, AIG, Bosch, Cal Energy, Capital One, Chevron, Quezon Power Limited, Santos Knight Frank, and SGV. Our virtual room sponsor, Eastern Communications. Our bronze sponsors, BDO, Manila Water, and Mitsubishi Corporation. Our patron sponsors, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Isuzu, International Workplace Group, Marriott International, Maywell Chemical Corporation, NYK Phil, and Sojitz Ship Management Inc. Our supporters, Big Box, Maersk, MCX International, Procter & Gamble Company, Philippine Center Corporation, SBI Global, Sun Life, and TechRep Inc. We would also like to thank our event partners, the Bankers Association of the Philippines, British Chamber of Commerce Philippines, CCI France Philippines, Chamber of Mines of the Philippines, Confederation of Wearables Exporters of the Philippines, the Employers Confederation of the Philippines, Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Inc., the Foundation for Economic Freedom, Government Academe Industry Network, Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Inc., Kayani Philippines, Makati Business Club, Management Association of the Philippines, the Nordic Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Philippine Eco Zones Association, PhilExport, Philippine Chamber of Food Manufacturers, Shareholders Association of the Philippines, and the Tax Management Association of the Philippines, Inc. We would also like to thank our media sponsors, ANC, Business World, Business Mirror, and Oxford. We also encourage everyone to join the midday and afternoon breakout session that we have organized especially for this forum. Please visit www.investphilippines.info/forum2020 under forum agenda midday breakout sessions. Please sign up for these virtual rooms to have access. For today, At 12 noon, we have in virtual room A playback of Mr. Federico Lopez's speech at the Management Association of the Philippines Man of the Year Awarding 2020. Same time, in virtual room B, we have the playback of the press conference on the third quarter performance of the Philippine economy featuring Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua. At 12:45 p.m. in virtual room A, we have the playback of Under Beijing's Shadow, Southeast Asia's China Challenge book discussion featuring Mr. Murray Hebert, head of research of the Bauer Group Asia and senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In virtual B at the same time, 12:45 p.m., we have the briefing on Make It Happen in the Philippines campaign. Our speakers include Ms. Lani Dormiendo and Ms. Ferry and Guillermo Broom of the Investments and Policy Planning Service Board of Investments. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all please stand for the Philippine National Anthem to be led by Mr. Froy Tahale.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiging, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwan, hati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, to officially open the forum and to tell us what to expect in today's program, we have the Senior Advisor of the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. John D. Forbes.
Thank you, Bea. And thank you, Froy. Froy is a young economist from Camiguin, near Cagayan de Oro, who worked in this office. And he has a fabulous voice, and we're going to invite him to do that every working day at AmCham forever. Thank you, Froy. Now, let me start the third day of our annual forum, not with a report on the 2 previous days, which have been very successful, and the recordings will be available if you missed any of them, but with the program for today, by thanking our corporate sponsors, of which we have 36, a platinum, gold, silver, bronze patron and supporter, and virtual room sponsor, and the event manager and secretariat, Team Asia. Thank you so much. Salamat po. And we also have what we call table sponsors. Next slide. Of course, we don't have real tables, but we can imagine that in the future old normal, or the future normal, we'll be back to tables in a ballroom, and we can serve you really good food again. We have 33 table and media sponsors, particularly ANC, Business Mirror, Business World, and the Oxford Business Group. Thank you. As well as, of course, the JFCs and the University of Philippines Public Administration Foundation bringing this 3-day event. Next slide, please. The overall program, if you've been with us, has been featuring keynote speakers and panels and breakout sessions. And I'm now going to tell you what we have today on day 3. Next slide. we actually, these are the keynote speakers, but we start with a speech from Undersecretary Perry Rodolfo that is part of the panel. It will be followed, and I'll show you the panel in a moment, followed by a senior economist of the World Bank Group. He's not really with IFC. We were introduced to him through the local IFC, but he's with the World Bank Group. And after the midday break, the new Speaker of the House, Lord Alan J. Velasco, and the panel I'll explain in a moment. And then at the end of the day, we'll have a speech from the Cabinet Secretary, Carlo Nograles, who you're very familiar with now because he's the co-chair of the IATF on the COVID pandemic. So let me show you the composition of the first panel in the next slide, please. Undersecretary Perry Rodolfo, well known to you as the governing head of the Board of Investment, and complements the speech by his colleague Undersecretary Fital Daba, and of course, Secretary Lopez on our opening day. We then have a panel consisting of Todi Chikiamko of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, Peter Wallace, very famous Peter Wallace of the Wallace Business Forum, and Bill Luce, who's been very busy with the Resilience Foundation and the pandemic, but in the past was the co-chair of the National Competitiveness Council. And a very special guest too on the panel is attorney Jeremiah Belgic, who's the Director General of the Anti-Red Tape Authority, and moderated by Quintin Pastrana. So that's going to be a fabulous panel, and it will be followed by the talk by the senior economist of the World Bank, Jaime Frias. In the midday breaks, we will rerun. We have three reruns here and one live. But I was really inspired last week by the speech of Piqui Lopez of the Lopez Group, First Philippine Holdings. I encourage people to take a look at that, his inspiring life and his inspiring advocacies for the Philippines in the future. Then we have a rerun of a recent press conference briefing on the economy by the acting secretary of NEDA, Carl Chua. And we have two more. One being a book talk on a book that surveys ASEAN on the influence of China by a prominent journalist in DC, Mary Hebert. And then we have BOI explaining the new promotional campaign of the Philippine government, Make It Happen, and that is live. The afternoon features, as I said earlier, the speech of the new Speaker of the House, and that will be followed. Now we have some corrections here because of the schedule of the BICAM. The fact that the Congress is, or the Senate is in recess this week and the BICAM is going on. So that two of the faces here of our friends from Congress will not be with us. But those that will be with us are Representative Sharon Garin from Iloilo, Representative Stella Luz Kimbo from Marikina, and Senator Ralph Recto, the President Pro Tem, the #2 official in the Senate, and a former head of NEDA and chairman of various committees in the Senate, highly experienced. And Attorney Elaine Collado will be the moderator. And with the next slide, I announce a forthcoming policy brief, which will address the topic that you see there, which is the theme of the entire forum, and the results of the poll that I hope you were able to take at the beginning. So with that, if there's another slide, I will say thank you, and let's have a great forum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forbes. Now to introduce our guest speaker and panel entitled, How Should the Philippines Compete Better? We have with us the director of the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters, Inc., Attorney Mimi Lopez Malvar.
Thank you, Bea. Thank you, John. Ladies and gentlemen in our virtual audience, I wish you a very good morning on behalf of the Joint Foreign Chambers. I hope everyone is safe and well, either at home or in your respective social distancing compliant offices, with a cup of coffee at hand, awake and alert for our next panel. I'm sorry we are not able to offer you coffee, but we hope to make it up next year. My name is Mig. I am a director of PAMURI, or the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies, Regional Headquarters, Inc. PAMURI is composed of various foreign multinational companies of varied nationalities under its fold, and through its members has been promoting its host country, the Philippines, for foreign investment and the establishment of ROHQs and RHQs in the country. In my day job, I am also Country Government Relations Manager for Procter & Gamble Philippines, and we have one of the first ROHQs who have set our operations in the Philippines. P&G has been in the Philippines for more than 85 years. Today is the third and last day of our 9th annual JFC Forum, entitled Foreign Investment in the Post-Pandemic Philippines. I hope you have been able to watch a lot of our discussions during the last 2 days. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, panel members, and moderator. Our speaker is a senior official in government on whose shoulders rests the heavy responsibility and privilege of assisting Filipino and foreign investors to venture and thrive in vast areas of economic pursuits in the country, and whose agency consequently acts as a one-stop shop in doing business in the Philippines. As one of the chief implementers of the Omnibus Investments Code, PAMURI and act hand in hand with our speaker and his agency in trying to promote the Philippines as an investment destination, as well as in addressing the concerns of existing investors and exporters. Dr. Seferino Perry S. Rodolfo is Undersecretary for the Industry Development and Trade Policy Group and Vice Chairman and Managing Head of the Board of Investments. He left academic and consulting work where he was known as one of the top trade and industry experts in the country a decade ago for public service. Yusek Rodolfo chairs a committee that coordinates all investment promotion agencies in the country and has been a champion of improving fiscal incentives in the CREATE bill so that the Philippines offers as good and even better than the competition. The members of the JFC highly appreciate the Undersecretary's tireless contributions to trade negotiations. While some JFC members are from countries that have free trade agreements with the Philippines, others do not. Notably, the American, Canadian, and European chambers have always supported their governments going forward to negotiate FTAs with the Philippines so that bilateral trade increases. Panel 5 is called How Should the Philippines Compete Better? This is a complex and highly important topic. Foreign investors considering new investments study prospective locations very carefully during their decision process. Competing better is also a very timely topic because DTI just launched its Make It Happen Philippines investment promotion campaign. Foreign chambers will support the campaign to encourage more investments from their home countries. Just yesterday, we announced a target to attract $50 billion in investments and 3 million jobs created in 10 years. We encourage you to register for the breakout session at 12 noon with the Board of Investment Office that will discuss the Make It Happen Philippines campaign. As many of you know, the World Bank classifies foreign investors into 3 categories. 1, market seeking, 2, resource seeking, and 3, efficiency seeking. The Philippines should constantly work to improve its competitiveness in all three categories. A country can never be too competitive. To win the competition for more foreign investment, we should study and implement many of the recommendations we are hearing over the 3 days of this forum in agribusiness, business processing, digital economy, electronic infrastructure, manufacturing, mining, tourism, and more. After his talk, Yusek Rodolfo will join our panel with 4 experts who are leading advocates for making the Philippines more competitive and who can add to Yusek Rodolfo's recommendations. First, we have Mr. Calixto Toti Chiquiamco, who is an entrepreneur, columnist, and policy reform advocate. Toti is president of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, Economic Policy Reform Advocacy. Next, we have Attorney Jeremiah Bellica, who is the Director General of the Anti-Red Tape Authority, a new agency created by the Ease of Doing Business Act and chaired by DTI Secretary Lopez. Red tape appears near the top of all lists of problems facing business, and we are looking forward to hearing from him on efforts being done by ARTA to curb this. Then we have Mr. Peter Wallace, chairman of the Wallace Business Forum and longtime author of the weekly Like It Is column in the Inquirer and private sector representative on the ARTA board. Finally, we have Mr. Guillermo Bill Luz, Chief Resilience Office of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, former co-chairman of the National Competitiveness Council and consultant to ARTA. Moderating the panel, we have Mr. Quintin Pastrana, whose career has spanned geothermal energy, entrepreneurship, and television newscaster and interviewer. Quintin, thanks for moderating again at our panel. Following the panel, we are hosting a guest speaker from the World Bank in Washington, D.C., senior economist Jaime Frias, who will talk about supply chains and investment promotion. I would like to remind everyone again that we are offering 4 great midday breakout session activities, including one from the International Investment Promotion Services of the BOI. Please register for those who wish to join, and you may register for more than one. We extend a warm welcome to our speakers, panelists, and moderator, and look forward to understanding better what should be done to improve Philippine competitiveness in order to attract more foreign investment. I now wish to invite Undersecretary Rodolfo to speak on our virtual stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mimi, and good morning to everyone. Special greetings also to John, to Eb, and all of our friends from the Joint Foreign Chamber, as well as to my fellow speakers, including Toti, DG Bellica, Peter, Bill, and to our moderator, Quintin. I've prepared just some few brief remarks on the topic, how should the Philippines compete better? This will be building primarily on the speech of the Secretary on the first day, his keynote speech. I think he shared with the audience the rebuild campaign of the Department of Trade and Industry and of the government, as well as the presentation yesterday of Yusek Fita Aldaba. Knowing that I'm already at the tail end of this Arangkada forum, I know that you've been bombarded already with so many information and insights. So I'll just like to keep this short. First, to be able to compete better, we really need to compete, meaning we have to open up the economy, which is what we have been doing. And what we are seeing is that as we peel away restrictions in quarantine protocols to be able to restart the economy in a safe way and implementing the health protocols, the production sector have been responding. It's quite sensitive to the quarantine protocols. So on the production side, the supply side, you can really see improvements. Still very challenging. By the way, since you are with us, it means that you are not monitoring, or you may be monitoring or multitasking and monitoring the PSA news conference that has happened at 9 o'clock and I think still ongoing. And you would be happy to note, as I said, it's still challenging employment rate, but at least the decline has been decelerating. You would remember that at the height of the quarantine protocols at its most at its strictest form. The Philippine economy, meaning we experience an unemployment rate of 17.8% in the labor force survey result of April. This went down to 10% for the quarter of July to September. This was released in September, and now our Philippine Statistics Authority has just released that we're down to 8.7%. So still very challenging, but you could really see that as you open up the economy more, the production sector side is responding. And just very quickly, the top industries with the largest drop in employment, so which means that the largest unemployment have been, and we could perfectly understand, we could really see on the ground, it's really arts, entertainment and recreation, accommodation and food service activities, real estate activities, transport and storage, and then manufacturing. While on the other hand, the increase in employment have come mainly from water supply, sewerage, waste management, and waste management, then fishing and aquaculture, education, information and communication, then administrative and support services. I would guess that the IT and then the administrative and support services, a big part of this would be in support of our BPOs or the BPOs themselves, as talking with Ray and Tal, BPO industry, despite the challenges, have been able to deploy at least 90% of their workforce, also because of their affinity to technology, to working under a work from home arrangement. So with that as a context, and in the discussions that we've been having, the dialogues we've been having with business groups, a big gap that we now have would be to really restart and instill consumer confidence. If you look at the Philippine economy, we are really, and very well known to everyone, we are really consumer driven. Yesterday, I was just with some businessmen from Hong Kong, and we were and also some banks who are discussing the investment grade outlooks for the Philippines, and they were discussing about the global external markets. But now the Philippines, if you look at the share of exports to total GDP, that would stand to just about, that ratio would be just about 15 to 16%. Comparing that with our neighbors, for instance, Malaysia and Thailand, that would be about 60 to 70%. And countries like Vietnam would be about 90% to even 110%. So we're really not a trade-driven economy from the export side, but really more internally driven, which is really why it's important for us to be able to reinstill or invigorate consumer confidence as we open up the economy. At the start of the pandemic, I used to think that we should make full use of the lull or the pause in economic activities for us to undertake or accelerate reforms and implementation of infrastructure projects. But as it turned out, this is not really, we cannot look at the pandemic as a lull. That was probably true in the first 1 or 2 months. But really, it's something that we have to deal with. And I do remember Secretary Sani Dominguez mentioning and cautioning everyone in the economic team. So he was saying, this is not going to be a sprint. This is not going to be a temporary brief stop. It's going to be a marathon. And we have to prepare to fight this pandemic as a marathon. And we have to really listen to our elders, the wisdom of our elders, because that proved to be very true, and has in fact been a good way of looking at the pandemic and to fight the pandemic. Now, when we look at competing or in any government projects or in any policies that we introduce in government, we always look at it in terms of 3 or 4 P's, letter P's. My colleagues in the BOI would be very familiar with this. Number 1, of course, would be policies. And then the second one would be the programs and projects to implement the policies. And then the third one would be promotion. How do we promote the changes? How do we advocate the changes? And how do we promote more participation by the private sector to bring them in to support the policies? And then the last one would be promotion. Last one would be people development. Now, in terms of policies, what we have been seeing is, number one, we all know that at the regional level, Philippines as part of the big global trading environment, we have signed on to the RCEP. I believe the Secretary has already mentioned this, maybe in his keynote speech, but in many other fora. Now, the RCEP is being a mega regional. It's something that we cannot afford to have been left out of. Many times speakers would be emphasizing the value of the RCEP in terms of gaining market access. But for me, it's not really the market access that is most important in the RCEP, but the production side, promotion of seamless value chain within the members of the RCEP, in particular because they have relaxed already rules of origin requirements. So for instance, if before, just very quick example, if you are going to export garments from the Philippines to, let's say, South Korea, under the ASEAN-Korea FTA, there are strict rules of origin requirements on where you should be sourcing your textile to make the garments going into Korea. But with the RCEP, it has been relaxed such that you could now source from any other member of the RCEP, including, for instance, we have been sourcing our textiles, for instance, from China or from Thailand and from Vietnam, but primarily from China. So this would now make garments made in the Philippines with textiles coming from China eligible for low duties as we export to Korea. And this is true for most tradable products. So for us, the value really of the RCEP is on the production side. So you cannot not be part of the RCEP because you would be left out of the production system. Now, with that as the context, our strategy when it comes to being able to attract investments, taking advantage of the RCEP is, number one, to take careful look at those countries which are not part of the RCEP and are now really thirsting for more information about the RCEP and how they can be competing within the context of the RCEP. In particular, we are referring to two economies that are not part of the RCEP and two big countries. But in particular, when you talk about those two big countries, it's really the US. The US not part of the RCEP, nor are they part of the CPTPP. So we will be having a big push under the Make It promotional campaign for US companies that are fearful that they will be left out in this mega regional. And then the two economies that I have mentioned are Hong Kong and Taiwan. We are supporting their accession when it is already when the rules would already be allowing it, and that may probably, because for the RCEP to enter into effect, what should happen is that the current members, we are now undertaking the domestic ratification processes, and there has to be 3 partner countries of the ASEAN and then 6 member economies of the ASEAN to ratify this domestically before the RCEP can take into full effect. And then 18 months after, we have the first the RCEP. And that we know, then when you talk about, for instance, the growth and development of manufacturing in countries such as, for instance, China, a big reason why China was able to develop its manufacturing sector is because of investments that have come from, for instance, economies like Taiwan and from Hong Kong. That's why we are really also prioritizing these non-RCEP these non-RCEP economies. Now, RCEP, that's with the mega regional, that's from the trade part. Now, domestically, you may know that the President has also issued just last week the investment priorities plan of the Board of Investments for 2020. This will be the transitional this will be the transitional listing of priority sectors that we will be promoting both for domestic and foreign investors as we transition to the strategic investment priorities plan of under the CREATE. As you may also well know, the CREATE has been passed by the Senate last week, and hopefully there will no longer be any BICAM, as I believe that the Senate has been in close coordination with the House of Representatives and also with the House of Representatives, because the House of Representatives had a different version, the CITIRA. And the Senate was also in close coordination with the Department of Finance all throughout the Senate deliberations for the CREATE bill, such that hopefully once this has been transmitted to the President, it would be the President should be able to sign the CREATE bill fast. Now, with the IPP 2020 and then with the CREATE bill under the SIPP, with the SIPP under the CREATE bill, I think we really have a good chance of being able to compete in terms of incentives in bringing in the foreign direct investments. What is very critical about the CREATE, and this is the reason, and you all also know this, but just to emphasize, well, basic reason why we were supportive of the CREATE, meaning at the Department of Trade and Industry and the BOI, were for the past decade or so, we have always been at loggerheads with the Department of Finance when it comes to CREATE. Very important is the removal of the nationality and the nationality bias and the export bias under our current system of incentives. The only way for foreign companies to be able to receive incentives when they invest in the Philippines is if they will be exporting at least 70% of their production. If they will be accessing the domestic market, then they will not be eligible for incentives. Just quick examples. Even as we speak now, we are talking with a major investor that has been looking at the Philippines for purposes of consolidating here the engine assembly, manufacturing and assembly for motorcycles. They are present now in 3 ASEAN countries. They are going to close down two of their facilities in 2 countries, and they would be consolidating it in the Philippines. What has been holding them back before is that they were not eligible for EO 226 of the Board of Investments because they are a foreign company investing in the Philippines for the domestic market and also for export. But they are foreseeing that because the Philippines has the fastest growing market, pre-COVID and even now we're seeing fast growing market for motorcycles. Just quick out also, sorry to bombard. I promise not to bombard you with information, but nevertheless, just quick note, motorcycles are among the fastest growing import categories for the country. And in fact, contributes, maybe it's the 3rd biggest contributor now to our trade deficit. And the trade deficit has been with the 2 countries where this foreign company would be closing its factories. So that's one clear way by which the CREATE would help us to be able to bring in the foreign investments and take advantage of our domestic market as we attract them. Because Mimi earlier mentioned about the World Bank framework on looking at foreign direct investments. You have the efficiency driven, you have the market seeking, you have the resource seeking, etc. For us, if you look at the market seeking, your domestic market is not necessarily an incentive for foreign companies to locate their factories here because market is contestable. Meaning, why would they be investing in a factory in the Philippines to access our domestic market when they can just easily put up this factory in Thailand? And because they are going to export the products from that factory, receive incentives from Thailand, and export that commodities at 0% duty under the ASEAN. So that was our major problem. That's why we were not able, one reason why we're not able to bring in these market-seeking FDIs. But now with the CREATE, we have a good chance of being able to do that, especially as we have a very reasonable length of time for investors to be enjoying incentives. 4 to 7 years of income tax holiday and another 10 years if you are going to be located in zones, you are eligible for either the special corporate income tax or choice of the menu from among the menu of incentives. If you are not in the in any of the export zones, then you are eligible to 4 to 7 years of income tax holiday, and then a 10-year of choosing from among a menu of deductible expenses from your income tax. So anyway, so that's, you have the RCEP, you have the IPP, and then also the CREATE, and then the SIPP under the CREATE. By the way, just a quick note on the IPP that the President signed in last week. The IPP 2020 is essentially a carryover of the 2017-2019 IPP, except that we were able to also include, I think, 2 major categories there. One major category is would be activities that would be supportive of employment generation outside of metropolitan Manila or metro regions in the Philippines, including the Balik Probinsya program. We are currently crafting out the guidelines. Hopefully this will be out by next week. This means that if and these activities would be eligible for up to 6 years of income tax holiday. Very important, because we know that you might be losing anyway first 1 or 2 years of the income tax holiday period, availment period, because of the challenging business environment. And then the other big category under the IPP would be commercialization of intellectual property, and also commercialization of R&D from the private sector. Because in the IPP 2017-2019, we have only included commercialization of government-funded R&D. But now, private sector IP, for instance, one of the projects that we were able to register under a separate category, but it could have been under this category had the IPP 2020 been already signed at that time. But nevertheless, we were able to register this particular project. It's a company that is jointly owned by US and UK investors, but they have a patented technology that was registered in Australia, and they will be implementing it in the Philippines. It's actually for copper mining, not mining per se, but the processing of copper. Now, in addition to the projects and programs, now, for instance, in the Board of Investments, we'll be launching this month the Leyte Ecological and Industrial Zone. This is a collaboration between the BOI and then the private sector and then the LGUs in Leyte. The intention here really is to have a hub, and also undertaken by Palafox and Associates, have a hub for copper and copper-based products. In particular, for us to be able to fill in the gap that we have from copper mining all the way to production of electric components and also automotive parts. So for instance, what is very important for us, okay, we probably are the country with the second biggest reserve when it comes to copper. We have Pasar for the copper smelting facility, but their product, what they produce, we need to export to Japan so that this can be turned into wire rods, which we then import back for this to be part of our supply chain for wiring harness. So we need to be able to fill in that value chain gap, and CREATE would give us now a fighting chance to be able to attract investors in this particular for this particular objective. Why? Because when we talk about the menu of incentives that are available under the CREATE, one of those, the CREATE is really meant to also help the Philippines develop its supply chain network, an advantage that, for instance, a country like Thailand has, but the Philippines, because we have been reliant so much on a system whereby development is so focused and for instance, export zones, where it is very efficient for you to just bring in your inputs components, assemble them, and then bring them out. When in fact, what we want to do is to incentivize these companies, these registered companies in economic zones, to look at just at the border of their or beyond the fence of the economic zones and look for possible suppliers. And we are going to incentivize them as they do that, because that is now allowed under the CREATE. So in addition, for instance, to the late ecological industrial zone, we will also be releasing jointly with the CCAP, the cold chain industry roadmap for the Philippines. And as I mentioned, one of the major program of the Board of Investments and DTI now is the Make It Happen in the Philippines campaign, taking advantage, meaning of the Filipinos are really known for the roll up your sleeve attitude as we face adversities. And we just have to make it happen in the Philippines. And in addition to that, we continue engaging our economic partners. So for instance, today and tomorrow, we have the JEC with Hungary. It's ongoing and they are physically present. There is a delegation in Hungary that is physically present here in Manila for this economic discussion. Hungary is important for us, well, as well as all of the other EU member countries, but primarily Hungary because of its support to the Philippines in terms of EU policies, including scheduling of the third round of the Philippines-EU FTA. Last week, we just had our JEC with Russia. We had our JECs with UK, Indonesia, Switzerland, US mini JECs. And then we also have with India, with Germany. So we continue on with all of these engagements, even despite of the pandemic. And hopefully we could also finish the negotiations with the Korea for an FTA. Sorry, I've been making this announcement, I said this year, but most likely first quarter of next year. Let me stop there as I think I ran out of time. I promised to make it brief, but sorry, I failed in that promise. But I hope that you gave some insights, especially on the on-the-ground things that are happening as we try to attract more investments. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Seferino Rodolfo, for that wonderful speech and presentation. We did gain a lot of insights. Please do remain on the stream to join the panel discussion. To moderate this esteemed panel, may we call on an entrepreneur, corporate executive, and communications professional, Mr. Quintin Pastrana.
Thank you very much, Bea. Good morning, everyone, and to our local and global audience, pleasant welcome to Arangkada. I will now call on, by alphabetical order, the panelists so they can give their brief remarks. Some of them have PowerPoint presentations. Some of them have extemporaneous prepared remarks. So let me call on first Attorney Belgiga from the Anti-Red Tape Authority.
Thank you, Quentin. May I be allowed to share my slide? Yeah, may I request thank you very much. Thank you very much, esteemed colleagues in the business sector, government sector. Magandang umaga, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. How should the Philippines compete better? One of the things that we are doing in ARTA is the strict implementation of the new law, or the ease of doing business law. Next slide, please. To give you an update, the president made mention to strictly simplify and make all services responsive and client friendly. And there is now a strong push for e-governance or GovTech in the country, which was accelerated because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, to start with, to give a brief idea of the Citizens Charter submission, more than 6,000 government agencies have already submitted their updated service charters or service standards to the Anti-Red Tape Authority that conforms to the 3 days, 7 days, and 20 days processing times. The Citizens Charter can be akin to a menu in a restaurant. When you go into a restaurant, you should know what are the services being offered and how much. The same way that the Citizens Charter should reflect each and every government agency's services. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a Citizens Charter that should be displayed in a conspicuous place of a government agency. They should also be placing this in their websites so that the transacting public would be guided and could demand from government agencies to abide by this list of services, the requirements, list of requirements, and then the processing times. Next slide, please. ARTA, one of the functions of ARTA is to file cases in extreme cases of incorrigible cases of red tape, wherein when we would find that there are deliberate attempts by government employees to not act on applications. From our first year of operation, there were about 23 government officers, officials that have already been investigated and filed cases against. On automatic approval, the Anti-Red Tape Authority also declares applications which are not acted upon within the processing times, but however are already complete in documents as automatically approved by operation of law. This is a new feature of the new ease of doing business law. There are about 6,250 applications now. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the program Nihimaya, or the National Effort for the Harmonization of Efficiency Measures of Interrelated Agency. The program Nihimaya is a wholesale streamlining of key sectors of society. For this year, the ARTA, together with the different government agencies, identified 5 key sectors for the wholesale streamlining. These sectors are the connectivity, telco sector, logistics sector, socialized housing sector, food and pharma sector, and power and energy. We were able to finish 2 months ago the connectivity sector, or the common towers, or the telecommunication towers, which saw the reduction of 30 permits from 32 permits to 8 permits, 86 requirements to 35, and from 241 days to 16 days. And we would also be seeing by the end of the year the same reduction for logistics, food and pharma, as well as socialized housing. Power energy is scheduled for first quarter of next year. Next slide, please. To give you a picture of what happened to the telco sector. Next slide, please. So from the time that we rolled out the streamlined processes, since August 11, there are already a total of 2,410 in the span of 3 months additional permits and licenses that were already issued to the telecommunications companies. The president is serious and has really called on the private and the public sector to really hasten the releasing of permits and the putting up of towers for the faster interconnectivity of the entire country. Next slide, please. This year, before the end of the year, ARTA would also be launching together with DTI, SEC, SSS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, and of course our partner DICT, the Central Business Portal, the phase 1 of the Central Business Portal, which would reduce the processing times of starting a business from 13 days to 1 day, 33 days to 1 day, 13 steps to 1 step, 27 requirements to only 5 requirements. Next slide, please. So, and also I did mention about the Nihimaya program for this year, which only featured 5 sectors. But for next year, we are seeing an additional maybe 10 to 15 more sectors, which would include renewable, healthcare, construction, education, mining, land transportation, and so on and so forth. So what we have seen in the common tower sector, or the telco sector, the connectivity sector, we would also are hoping and expecting to see also in the other sectors as we stream wholesale. Next slide, please. Few more slides and I'm done. So this is just a central business portal. Next slide, please. ARTA also issued guidelines on the issuance of permits and licenses under the new normal. This featured some guidelines for government agencies to follow during this pandemic, where health protocols are strictly being enforced. Of course, this already served as a guideline for other agencies as they transition to digital payments for licenses and permits, use of digital signatures or e-signatures, usage of the technique of data sharing, and also using a single window approach. And there are other streamlining techniques and measures that ARTA is already requiring government agencies to observe. Next slide, please. There is also a anticipated great improvement to come with the trade sector through the use of the TradeNet or the National Single Window Program. The Philippine National Single Window Program, it will now automate the licensing, permit clearance, and certification system integrated into one platform for regulatory agencies. ARTA is now assisting the steering committee for the Philippine National Single Window, and we anticipate that by first quarter to second quarter next year, we would be able to encourage the 65 other agencies to already use the platform. Next slide, please. This is just the illustration of what the platform would look like. Next slide, please. With this, we just want to say that the Philippines battle against red tape, or the train of reform against red tape, is already on the move. On it are the aspirations and the visions and the dreams of the Filipino people for a better and more streamlined and e-governance centered country. Everybody is gaining momentum on a daily basis, on a per hour basis, and we do hope that everybody would join. And anyone who would try to hinder this people's train of reform will simply be ran over. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Director John Beherica. And now we have the President of the Foundation of Economic Freedom, Tito Toti Chiquerongo. Toti?
Thank you.
I think we lost. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Toti, for joining us.
Well, the topic is how to compete better. While RCP will enable us to expand our markets, I don't think it's going to make us compete better, especially relative to the other members of the RCP. If you ask me, there are, I think, 2 policies the government should do to be able to compete better. One is, I think we really need to depreciate the peso. The strong peso actually indicates a weak economy. During the lockdown, I ordered online some chicken. I was surprised when it was really chicken from the USA that was delivered to me. So it shows to you that there's a flood of imports with all of this, with the strengthening of the peso. Actually, the strong peso indicates a weak economy, contrary to what economic managers would say, because actually imports are down, and that's why the peso is behaving that way. Now, of course, the authorities will say, "Oh, we're doing inflation targeting. We're not doing exchange rate targeting." I think that's BS. For one thing, Vietnam was just named a currency manipulator by the United States. because they've been undervaluing their currency. And now, of course, they have already, I think, about to overtake us in GDP per capita, and it probably outrace us for the next 10 years, you know? And that's the reason why their exports as a percentage of GDP is about 100%, while ours is stuck at 30%. Now, what are the benefits for us to be able to, when we have a weak peso, to compete better? One is it makes labor cheaper in dollar terms. It gives more money to, it makes our tourism, our BPOs more competitive, our exporters. And finally, it gives more money to OFWs. At a time when we need stimulus spending, it will put more money in the pockets of OFW families without the need for a bureaucracy. So this will stimulate consumption spending at a time when we have a demand shock. So this is some, and it, you know, it is possible for authorities to be able to weaken the peso. The central bank can really buy the dollars in the open market. I think during the time of Saiki Tangco, the BSP was able to prevent the peso from breaching 50 to 1. You know, so I think they should do this, because for as long as the peso is this strong, no matter what policies they have, what RCP, we cannot compete, because the imports will become much cheaper, and it will be hard for our domestic industries to compete. The second policy that I would recommend to be able to compete better is really a domestic competition policy. Because you know, the World Bank has said that the Philippines is the most concentrated economy in Asia. That means monopolies and duopolies dominate a broad swath of the economy, which makes our costs here quite expensive. So what we need is a competition policy is to open up industries. From telecommunications, we need to pass the Open Access and Data Transmission Act, so you don't need a franchise to be able to offer broadband. You need to liberalize satellite broadband, so that right now, immediately, you can have broadband speeds all over the archipelago. We need to therefore really open up entire sectors of the economy if you want to compete better. So we need a strong competition policy to drive growth in this post-pandemic period. So those are just my two cents worth about how we can compete better. Thank you.
Dr. Chief Tiamco, thank you very much. Now we move on to Mr. Guillermo Luz, Chief Resilience Officer and Advisor for the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. Bill, good to have you with us.
Yep. Thank you, Quintin. Just a few remarks about how to make us compete better and how to be more competitive. I think, first of all, it's commendable the work that DG Belgica is doing at ARTA for the Nehemiah project to speed up the processes, to shorten the processes and speed up time for certain procedures and sector important segments of the economy. So I think we should continue to encourage that. I think part and parcel of that is really automation. I think if we don't invest in the automation and digitization of these processes, then I think we will have wasted an opportunity. This is the perfect time to get on with the digitization program, because anyway, the economy has been in lockdown for quite a stretch. Traffic, mobility have been significantly reduced. It's beginning to pick up now, but earlier in the year, significantly reduced. So there should have been, we should have taken the opportunity to move more of the government transactions online. In the way that we've seen financial transactions and e-commerce transactions move online, we've been forced to see actually education move online, and so I can't see why government should be exempt from this shift to a digital transformation. So I think that would help us. And coming off a post-COVID situation, I think then we will be better. We'll be better for it. So that would be one area. I think that if you noticed for this year, and John for sure will have noticed it, is that at least two major uh, competitiveness indices have been deferred or postponed. The first has been the IFC, World Bank Ease of Doing Business, and that's been deferred from its usual release date. No new release date has been given, but that has to do more with methodology questions and arguments against it. I think it still needs adjustment, and maybe we'll see it this year. Maybe we'll see it next year if it ever comes back. I do think that when it comes back, it'll probably be slightly tweaked and adjusted for methodological issues. The second important index which has been deferred in its release has been the World Economic Forum's own Global Competitiveness Report, which should have been out in November, has now been deferred to December. But in both cases, will not be releasing rankings this year. I think they're going to be releasing more qualitative reports and insights based on the COVID situation. I think we also need to reflect upon those areas of the economy that we haven't paid too much attention to in the competitiveness discussions. Uh, Typically we talk about ease of doing business, about infrastructure, about bureaucracy, about red tape, and things like this, and of course investment and trade policy, and those are all important. But there are other areas that are going to, I think, take on a greater weight into the future. One will be the way we look at the way education is delivered. So not just the educational performance of our system, but the manner by which it is delivered. And I think that delivery is going to have to be much more digital over time. I don't believe the education sector will revert back, even if it goes back to face to face. I think it's going to have to consider serious long-term hybrid and blended methods going forward. We have to think of a good way to deliver content and learning and pedagogy in an online fashion. And it's going to be a bit tricky because it's going to have to prepare both teachers and students and parents actually for this new environment. The second area that I think we would definitely have to focus on long term, which we haven't, and I think its weaknesses have been exposed, is in our public health system. And I think because of global pandemics, I suppose travelers, business travelers, tourists, investors will also be looking at how the public health systems of countries operate and how they are, I guess, capacitated to deal with potential pandemic. And I think here we have to think that this pandemic, the current one, is going to be with us for a little while longer. But also, we can't discount that future pandemics will come into play over the years. So that a public health system is going to have to be a very strong part of a measurement of national competitiveness these days. So I foresee that those are the types of changes we need to make into the future to make sure that the country will remain competitive. Maybe the third area would have to be in the sphere of environment and climate change. And clearly, the Philippines is a victim here. We've been affected by a great deal of weather-related typhoons. In fact, we've had a string of about 4 or 5 of them in the span of 3 weeks. And certainly, we have to be looking not only nationally but globally at climate change. So I think that's going to be a key feature of competitiveness measures we look at into the future: education, public health, and climate change. Thanks, Kim.
Bill, thanks so much for your pointed comments. And I do note your past role as the private sector lead in the National Competitiveness Council. So appreciate your insights in that regard as well. Finally, we have Mr. Peter Wallace, Chairman of the Wallace Business Forum. Peter, good to see you. Good to have you with us. Peter, you may still be on mute, I think.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll start again. What I liked in Perry's talk was we should always listen to our elders. Being an elder, I couldn't agree more. And what I found disturbing with my Bahika's talk was that he came first because he's B and I'm W, and everyone always does it in alphabetical order. Bill talked about digitization. I agree, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. Next chart, please. Next chart. Thank you. We're in an ICT world today. COVID is encouraging a shift from globalization. Factories are moving back home. Automation is taking away jobs. And we've got to focus now on a completely new era. And I believe for the Philippines, it's IT and agriculture. Next chart. Amazon's the 9th largest company, Apple the 12th. They didn't even exist 20 years ago. General Motors, GE, they're no longer the top guys. Amazon and Walmart in the last 9 months have been putting on employees. Physical companies have been taking them off. Online shopping has grown dramatically. The physical world is laying off hundreds. The virtual world is employing them. Next chart. AI is taking over as well. Robots are running factories. AI is now taking over in the service industry as well. And COVID-19 has accelerated this tremendously. What we expected would happen in the next 5 to 10 years has happened in 5 to 10 months. And the way in which we're working has changed dramatically. We're not going to the office anymore. We're working from home or somewhere else. Going to meet people physically, not possible now. And in the new normal, will still be much less than it used to be in the past. I believe that businessmen will no longer travel overseas to have a meeting. They'll go Zoom because the huge cost saving and time saving will make it much more possible. I'm now beginning to learn how to have their workforce work away from the office. That means, of course, that you're going to have to be much more careful about cybersecurity, data transfer, as we move more and more into this arena. Next. 1941 was the beginning of it all. And if you haven't watched this movie, you most certainly should. Alan Turing was the inventor of the computer, a mostly mechanical device that broke the German code and helped to save the war. A remarkable man who unfortunately died far too early at the age of 42. Next. In 1956, not that long ago, IBM had its first major computer random access disk drive machine that filled the whole floor of an office building. Today, the thing in your hand is far superior in its computer capability than that machine. That in a scant 50 or so, 60 or so years. Next. So if we're going to attract FDIs, I think it should not, it can still be for factories, but that's not the long-term solution. It's got to be for tablets. We've got to start thinking about creating a future in the IT world, not in the physical world. We must put our head in the clouds if we are to get a real attraction into the long-term future and even the short-term future of the Philippines in the world. Next. So the point of all this is, I believe the future of the Philippines is in IT. But all sectors of government are going to have to shift their focus to that IT, and it's got to start at the beginning. I have seen several times, literally, children in prams with an iPad. That's the way we've got to start. And our education system has to be changed. I was very upset today to read in the Inquirer that only 1% of 5-year-olds can put together a sentence in writing. We are way down the scale on education. not just in the fundamentals, but in the absolutely essential shift into teaching them in the IT world, to teach them the virtual world, so that they can get jobs in that world. It's a tough task, but it's got to get high priority. And the DTI, BOI, DICT, ARTA will have to take the lead for business to move them into this arena as well. But I'm very pleased to see that ARTA has gone a long way on doing this and in getting computerization into organizations. So the rocket ship has taken off and we're off to the moon, and we better be ones that land on it. Next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the clarion call, and really always for your pointed remarks. Let's get the panel all together here, and while that's happening, let me just weave your presentations together and set the context for our next 15 minutes. Basically, this really boils down to competitiveness. No? When you look at the figures we've had, the Philippines has had a slight uptick from the last competitive ranking, still at the mid-60s, but certainly 20 points down from its high in 2010. I mean, there is some upside regionally. We know that we're on the heels of RCEP. We're anticipating the passage of the create other reforms that you pointed out that are coming. And yet, we've still experienced 2 consecutive quarters of double-digit decline. Now, gentlemen, you've put together some policies that help us with long-term resilience. In the spirit of Arangkada, let me ask you, what are the immediate steps in the next 3 months that need to be taken by this government to move the needle to get us from the red into a sustainable black by Q1 2021? I guess I'll start the same way we began. Director General.
Well, thank you, Quentin. That's a very thank you, Quentin. That is a very nice question that would, I think we could go all day just for that question alone. But let me just maybe focus on what ARTA actually foresees that needs to be done. The president already made it very clear that services and the processes should already go online. But one of the things that is very important for us to understand, that automation actually cannot happen without streamlining and re-engineering of systems and programs. I would always say that automation is actually the easier part. The harder part actually is streamlining, re-engineering of systems and programs. It's just the entire system and a process of peeling off the very old, archaic, even Jurassic processes that has been there for so many years and even decades, and just changing the entire paradigm. And I think that for me, I think that is one of the more important things that we could really do to push for the jump starting of the economy and making things better. And the creation of the passage of the Ease of Doing Business law, the creation of ARTA, the special powers that the Senate and Congress is now giving to the president is, just heading towards that direction of streamlining and automation. There are already identified projects and even programs or projects that are already in the pipeline when it comes to streamlining and automation. I did mention some of them, the Nihimaya program, the National Single Window. These things would be able to help us a lot in answering and really jumpstarting the economy and getting us more competitive. Thank you.
Thanks, Director General. And I can't wait any sooner for those reforms to come in, especially streamlining is a key factor for improving competitiveness. Toti, beyond peso depreciation and the domestic competition policy, what would you like to see immediately between the holidays and January from this government?
I didn't get the question, but I think is it what I want to see from the government? Well, in fact, I just recently wrote about it. There are a number of things that they can easily do. Aside from the things that I mentioned, one is I think they should liberalize mining. Remove the restrictions on open pit mining, etc. As long as they comply with the ISO regulations and the environment, I think mining is a competitive industry for us. We're one of the most mineralized countries in the world, and therefore we should open up the industry because it can generate government revenues, generate exports. At the same time, it's out there in the bondocks. I mean, it's part of the Balik Provincia program. Secondly, of course, to liberalize tree plantations. That's what we have been advocating, because right now private tree plantations are lumped together with natural forests, and it's overregulated. There are permits for everything. So all you need to do is say DAO, liberalizing that. We should, of course, promote agriculture, because food is very important. And unless we have ever amend the comprehensive agrarian reform law, or because land fragmentation is the single biggest problem now in agriculture. So we have to solve that, either amending it, or as I personally have been recommending, is really to have debt condemnations in order to let farmers lease out their lands. Because right now, with the restrictions, they can't lease out their lands. And of course, I said open the telecommunications sector by passing the Open Access and Data Transmission Act, and also classify satellite broadband as a value-added service, so you don't need a franchise to be able to go into satellite broadband. So those are some of my very quick suggestions on what the government can really do right now. And also, of course, finally, really shift the pivot to PPP. I think the problem is we have a incompetent and corrupt bureaucracy, and and we have been clearly underspending in terms of BBB, build. So I suggest to the government pivot to PPP in order to be able to solve the problems of quick implementation and corruption. That's all.
Yeah, Dottie, thank you very much. Just a note, I mean, high points there would be sustainable resource extraction, certainly within law, and having it be the fifth gear for the economy, especially since we're the fifth most mineralized country in the world, plus the fact that we do can have a sustainable forest cover similar to the Scandinavian countries that have our best practices. Getting the economies of scale in agriculture, perhaps through infrastructure, access to finance, and finally for infrastructure, really getting the public-private partnership program there. So the speed of the private sector, capital, and at the same time, the steering of the government. Thank you very much, Toti. Now, Bill, you've seen this over the last several years, over the decade, in fact, and you've noticed best practices from around the world that can be applied here within a short period of time. What's the low-hanging fruit that you see for the Philippines to do?
Well, I think in answer to your first question about how to get the economy turned around and moving, the short and simple fact is I think we need to open up the economy a bit more. Now we're in pretty well the world's longest lockdown, or at least one of the strictest lockdowns, and that's really economy and people have paid a price. We've seen the numbers, second quarter, third quarter, what they look like, and we've got the biggest drops in the region, certainly. So I think every move you can take to open up the economy in a safe manner, we need to move aggressively on that, because I just can't see how much longer we can last as a country. And the longer we shut down, I think the longer the recovery will take. So that's kind of a critical factor we need to look at within the fourth quarter and into the first quarter. The second, I think, is that we need to probably long-term focus more on city competitiveness. We always focus on, what we can do nationally, but where the rubber meets the road has really been in the cities and in rural areas. Toti mentioned agriculture. I think these are the areas that we need to focus on at the local government level, sort of more grassroots approach, and I think that will serve us well in the long run. And then going back to the public health space, if you take a look at what's happened to us throughout COVID, when we had to get tests, we were at the we were really at the mercy of the market, where we had to start bringing in all sorts of test kits and even PPEs were, almost 100% imported. For the longest while, there was no local production. We're just having to bring in everything. And now the story is repeating itself in vaccines. So we have other countries in the region, in ASEAN, with some vaccine production capacity, which at least gives them a vaccine security. And in the Philippines, we don't have that. We have to import all the vaccines. And so I'm thinking that, if we take a very long-term view of what could happen in the public health arena over time and with pandemics and disease, that maybe we should be thinking of our own vaccine security by building up some capacity to at least do some vaccine finishing or vaccine production in the country, as we have seen in Indonesia and in Thailand, for instance. So, I don't think we should be left. We should leave ourselves at the mercy of these forces over time. Once we know our vulnerabilities, I think we better plug these gaps. But I would say at the short term, we have to open up the economy a bit more. And Yusek Perry already mentioned it. We see that quarter on quarter, the employment numbers and the economic numbers, they respond every time we make a switch from ECQ to MECQ to GCQ to MGCQ. There is a pronounced shift in economic activity and economic behavior. So once you have the confidence built, and that goes along with your, I guess, confidence in your public health system, then you have more economic activity, and then I think we can see the economy rebound.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And not to put too fine a point to it, it really is the most immediate thing to do to gain confidence. We're a consumption-driven economy, so at the end of the day, it's about being able to build local capacities to get that vaccine rollout and so that you can open up the economy domestically, which is really one of the key drivers before we even shift to a fully trade-orientated economy. Peter, you've been a great advocate for FDI, but now you're pushing for digitization. What other reforms do you see the government can do in the next 2 months?
I think in the immediate term, the government has took early and courageous steps to revive, to give money into the economy, to help people to survive through this very difficult time. But John Maynard Keynes, one of the world's probably best known and greatest economists, said some time back that the success of recovering from the Great Depression was government spent huge amounts of money to recover. And I wonder if the government should be thinking about what they've done is good, but maybe it should be more. We should be getting more out into trying to get the small businesses back into business, getting people without jobs some income so that they can at least spend some money and we can keep the consumer economy going. And I think, as I mentioned, and I will be writing about, we've got to pour a large amount of money into education. We have to have an educated workforce. It's fairly clear to me today that we don't have it. We pretend that we don't. I agree with Toti, we should open up mining again. And as I mentioned, and he did too, agriculture. Agriculture is one of the best things we can do because we've got the land, it's fertile, we've got the climate, it's good. We can grow crops that others can't and are great demand around the world. And we can feed our population. We can create jobs out there. We don't want people crowding into cities. We want them staying out in the rural areas. The average age of a farmer today is 57. We're not getting young people to go into farming. I like the idea that has just been raised of giving agriculture graduates up to 3 hectares of land for free to go out and farm. But I don't agree it should be where they are resident. I think that was a very funny thing to say. A lot of these graduates are in the cities. There isn't any agricultural land. There should be no limit to it. If some young person wants to go and farm and has the expertise to do it, we should encourage and help him to do so. As I mentioned, I think that we have to be shifting more in our promotion and our thinking towards the service industry away from the physical industry, which doesn't mean we give up on the physical industry, but it's a tough fight. We're up against very stiff competition from Vietnam and Thailand, particularly, who are on land with China and with much of the rest of Asia, and we're an archipelago out in the middle of the ocean where it's more expensive to do things. Virtual businesses, geography is irrelevant. It doesn't matter where you are, you've got a business. So I really want to emphasize how important I think it is to put a lot more effort into thinking about and getting into IT in a big, positive way.
Peter, thank you very much. I mean, gentlemen, you presented a very good and immediate low-hanging fruit roadmap for the administration to consider. There were a number of questions from the audience that were directly addressed to Undersecretary Rodolfo, especially the open access bill, the SIPP program, economic clusters focused priorities. I think even the audience, it resonates with the audience, and we're going to send those questions directly to the BOI to get those responses. But having said that, when you look at these reforms, they're not happening in a vacuum. You're looking at ASEAN getting around $155 billion in net FDI, and the Philippines getting 3% of that. Vietnam, which is a stellar performer now in ASEAN, getting 3 times more than that. Tell us about what Vietnam is doing right and what we can adopt and transcend in terms of their policies. Director General, you've also been, you've been also corresponding with other of your reform counterparts in ASEAN. What do you see needs to be done that they're doing that we can do better?
Yeah, I'll just focus on one of the things when it comes to the interconnectivity, Quintin. One important factor, since everything is going online now, is the speed of our internet connectivity. There is a very glaring disparity when it comes to the Philippines, the number of cell sites and the number of the speed of the internet in some important portions of the country, because of the the non-presence or the lack of presence, or basically the speed by which the internet is very glaring. Even for Vietnam, we still need at least 50,000 towers in the country just to be competitive. And the reason why ARTA and the other agencies started our Nehemiah program on the interconnectivity, because there are a lot of other sectors whose competitiveness is actually hinged upon the transition on the internet connectivity. Of course, even medical services are now being delivered through our the internet, and education as well, in all of these things. And I think this is one of the aspects that Vietnam and the other surrounding neighbors that we have invested a little earlier than us. But there are already now moves by, or suggestion even by the DICT, and I remember during the congressional budget deliberation of the ICT, it was mentioned that the government itself is now considering very seriously on investing on putting up the towers themselves. That is very important, because even if we have already eased on the permitting process for the private sector, but it's still the private sector who would still be putting up these towers. I think the move for the government to really build it and invest for the time being is important immediate measure for us to be able to catch up with our neighbors. And I do believe as we speed up our connectivity, it would have a immediate effect also to the other sectors. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr.
Quintin, if I may just react to that, I think the difference has to do with the speed of implementation, and speed is everything. So going back to the example that DG Belgica mentioned, Vietnam has a smaller population than the Philippines and more towers. So what's happened is, so what's happened is that they really have the ratio of people to towers, to facilities, is much lower than ours, and consequently, because they have more infrastructure relative to people than we do, they have greater performance and greater speed. No, and the reason is that they have been able to build out their infrastructure far faster than we have. So I think that we need to focus on speed, because in competitiveness, speed is everything. It's one thing to write a reform, but the execution is what matters at the end of the day. Whichever agency, whichever institution can execute the fastest is going to be the best for the country. And whichever country executes faster than the other always has an advantage in this game.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Bill and Director General. I mean, I also note that it's an oranges to apples comparison. Vietnam has a contiguous landmass, but it does not excuse any government from using terrain as an excuse for rolling out infrastructure faster and creating more competition, as Toti mentioned. Toti, on your end, what do you think our Vietnamese counterparts are doing right?
Can I interrupt a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the ways we can speed up.
Go ahead, Peter.
One of the ways we can speed up internet in the cities is with fiber optic. If we concentrate more on putting fiber optic into all the offices and homes, that would obviate some of the problems we've had with towers and assure us of a continuous and fast speed.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Toti, go ahead.
We can quickly bypass the need for towers with satellite broadband. There are already satellites with the Philippines as its footprint. So you just have to turn the thing on, and with the you could have broadband speeds with satellite. In fact, was this Tesla's Elon Musk Starlink is already delivering broadband to satellite at 160 Mbps. These are low orbit satellites. No, so all it needs is the president to issue an executive order saying that satellite is a value-added service, and there's no need for franchise, and automatically you'll have the entire archipelago be able to connect.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That certainly politicizes the process, but more importantly, if you think about it, I mean, same conversation I had with, I think, Dr. Sixto Rojas, who is advocating for satellite as a way to transcend our archipelago. That I think those things are well taken. But gentlemen, just a couple more points in terms of what our ASEAN neighbors are doing better that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We can adopt on our own and really jumpstart the economy so we're in the black by 2021. Leave it as an open floor before I go to the last question. All right. I mean, silence is a good response, but I think it's certainly bears.
Quintin,
yeah, go
I think USEC is raising his hand.
Sorry, Quintin, can you hear me?
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, we talked for a bit. Thanks for joining us again. Thank you.
Thank you also. But just quick inputs also on the satellite service that draft E has already been presented to the Economic Development Cluster and has been unanimously endorsed. So hopefully we'll have that policy soon. Also to mention that we have a consortium of Filipino companies that are into the electronic space that can actually do the equipments that would take advantage of the satellite services so that we can bring in Wi-Fi services all the way to the remotest barrios or villages in the Philippines. Then also with respect to fiber optic, as was pointed out by Peter, even during this pandemic, the Singaporean Chinese company that has registered with us for a 60,000 kilometer network of fiber optic cables in the Philippines has continued to implement the project. They have been going to LGU seeking permits. With the help of ARTA, we're able to facilitate some of these, and that is continuing on. And then with respect to the telco towers, there are many interested parties, and we were able to register, I think, already 3 foreign companies into the telco tower space. So thank you.
Okay, Undersecretary, while we have you here also, people were talking about a lot of questions the audience had to do with the SIPP and all these other reforms that you're putting together in the executive department. Tell us about the pace of that and when do we expect to see that?
Okay, hopefully we can, for the IPP 2020, the guidelines, hopefully we can be able to release that before December 19, as that would be the end so far, meaning as it stands now of Bayanihan 2. So really we're rushing that out. But we have been already at it even prior to the signing of the president. For the SIPP, we're waiting for the president, of course. For the Senate and for the House, and it's good that we'll have a session this afternoon with the legislators. So maybe you could ask them if there will still be a BICAM. As it is, I think there will no longer be a BICAM, if at all very, very focused questions, and then it will be transmitted already to the president. But even as we are doing that, we are already working on the SIPP and coordinating with the DOF for the IRR for the CREATE bill. There.
Thank you, Undersecretary.
Quintin, I have fiber optic in my house, and I'm running 100 megabytes per second, put in by Smart just recently. A remarkable improvement in what I used to have.
Thanks, Peter. And I hope it's the same in Caliraya, where I need to install one as well. So gentlemen,
it's in Caliraya. It's in Caliraya.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. Well, I'll have one installed as well. Now, gentlemen, back to the discussion. One of the things we have from the audience is about long-term competitiveness, and that's really language skills, English, global language of commerce. Our competitiveness has been slipping there as well. Can you give us, obviously the DepEd is not here, but can you give us your take in terms of how to improve that fluency and that working literacy so we can take advantage of the digitization, which is primarily going to be in English, just the same. Peter, we'll go to you and then go to the rest of the panelists.
So, can you repeat it again? I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry, one of the key things the audience was raising was about competitiveness in English skills being, the fundamental building block towards, adapting to digitization. Could you talk to us about what kind of reforms you'd like to see the CHED and DepEd so that we can jumpstart and reverse the slide?
I think we first of all got to rethink just what the curricula should be in our schools. I haven't studied it in depth, but my guess is that they're still teaching in the way we did 50, 100 years ago. Still teaching the 3 R's in a traditional way, adding in geography and history and a few other things, but ignoring to a great extent what the real world is now, which is the IT world. We talk about a book for every child. We can't provide them yet, but we talk a book. No, a tablet for every child has to be. And that's the only way we're going to move forward. So the first thing we've got to do is find the funds to give every child a tablet, not one to share amongst several, but their own tablet, so that's where they're learning from. And certainly we must continue with our local languages, Tagalog, Cebuano, etc., and they must remain a part of our educational system. But English must be equally taught. My wife speaks perfect English because at school, we have allowed English to deteriorate in some kind of nationalist thinking. That's not nationalism at all. The world, and we are part of that world today, speaks English. Maybe one day it'll be Mandarin, but right now it's English. And we have to have our children very fluent in English. Continue to be in their local languages, but English has got to be a major one. And we've got to be teaching them how to do programming and all the IT stuff that I have no idea about because I'm much too old. But the young people, it must be second nature. They must come out of school and go straight into a service business in the IT sector. This has got to be a major focus, I think, of the educational system. And I think this is where we've got to now focus our attention, is the Philippine educational system, and in some depth. I mean, I was horrified yesterday to read a letter to the editor in the Inquirer from, sadly, I forget his name, the man who always reads through the manuals and books of learning for children and finds errors in them. And the errors that he quoted were horrific. I mean, so obviously wrong. so badly done. I couldn't believe it. And if our children are learning in this way, God help us. This is not right. We must improve how we are teaching the children and be teaching them into the future.
Thank you, Peter. Well taken. Let's go to Bill Luz, and then we'll go to Toti, Director General Behika.
Yeah, thanks.
Undersecretary Perry. Bill.
Yep, thanks, Quintin. Yeah, English is obviously necessary, but not the only building block for education. So while we need English, I think we're going to need a lot of other things. As I already mentioned, I think the way forward is that education, its delivery, its content, the whole way of teaching is going to change. It's accelerated by COVID, but I don't think it'll come back to what it was before. And I think we've got to change along with that and look for better ways to deliver learning and learning skills and content. And today, while we think of languages in terms of linguistics, where English or your own local dialect or a foreign language, but there's a whole other language of science and a whole other language of IT and computer coding that we also need to be aware of. So I think competitiveness is not going to rely 100% on English. It's going to be multilingual, but in a very different way. It's going to be both language and maybe some sort of IT or coding language, whatever they may be in the future. We're going to have to learn those skills as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And just to build on that, I was just moderating an ILO forum, and that touches on the issue itself: critical thinking, teamwork, coding, emotional resilience. It's really a systems way of thinking. So that point is well taken. Toti, your take on the education.
Sorry.
Yeah, your take on English as how to improve, how to reverse that slide in English competitiveness.
Well, I don't think it's really necessary. I think the more important is the language of mathematics. Because mathematics underlies a lot of science, of coding, even computer games. It's really based on algorithms, in mathematics. So that's the important more language rather than English. I mean, we have China became an economic superpower without even learning English, right? So I think it's more important that we know the universal language of mathematics.
Yeah, thanks, Toti. Much appreciated. And then I certainly echo that. It's really a literacy for numeracy that'll help us with the coding and systems thinking. Thank you very much. Undersecretary Perry, your take, and before we go to Director General Behika.
Okay, just very quickly, an on-the-ground example, Dyson has recently announced that they are putting up in the Philippines the R&D center that will be hiring about 400 engineers. When they started here way back in 2015, we started discussions actually in about 2012, 2013, because they were prodding us to apply for the EU GSP Plus program. When we got that, so initially they went here for trade purposes because of our preferential access to the EU market, and very conservative. They put up one line for hair dryers. They were initially quite concerned that we may not have the engineers and the technicians to be able to produce these hair dryers. But they have since seen the capability of Filipinos, not just of the academic institutions here in Metro Manila, but even the second or third tier in south of Luzon, and have since really expanded their production capacity. I think they now have 6 line manufactured here, the most advanced motors that they use for vacuum cleaners and hair dryers. And there are many more products that they will be putting up here next year. But very important is that R&D center. Hopefully they would really make up their R&D center competing with the current one that they have now in another Asian country. So things are also happening in the Philippines, but we welcome all of these inputs, and we really do agree that there are things that we really need to do for our overall long-term competitiveness. Thank you, Quintin.
Thanks, Undersecretary Perry. Certainly, proof of the pudding is in the eating. We've got investors coming in. We just have to identify exactly what else they need to stay and grow their investment. Finally, Director General Behika.
Thank you, Quintin. Not just maybe in terms of English or education. Let me just, in general, the changing of the paradigm that has to happen, and in a sustained basis, in a long-term basis, I would just want to quote very quickly what Anna Piperal of Estonia, the first digitalized or e-governance country, said. She said that the central idea behind the development or e-governance is the transformation of the state's role or the government's role and digitalization of trust. No, if we think about it, that most countries, people don't trust their governments, and the government don't trust the people back. And all the complicated paper-based formal procedures are supposed to solve that problem, which actually weighs down on the competitiveness and the competitiveness of a country. So all of this paper that is being used to supplement, what is lacking in trust, does not actually solve the trust issue. They only make it more complicated. But through the use of technology, we can actually maximize it in getting the trust back by creating an efficient and user-centric, citizen-centric delivery system. I do believe that what needs to be institutionalized in a long term is not only with DepEd or CHED, but also in how we prepare our government people or those who would want to enter in government services, whether they are already in their tertiary level, in college level, by just harnessing this very few but important principles like redesigning rules and procedures, getting rid of unnecessary data collection, task duplication, and just becoming more open and transparent as a country. And these things we should already invest as a people, as a government, in those who would want to train the next generation of people in government should actually agree that these foundational truths should already be part of the future of the Philippines, as we so say it. Thank
Yeah.
you, Clinton.
General, thank you very much. And I also thank Undersecretary Rodolfo for your leadership and your continued belief and efforts to put reforms in the Philippines. Now, gentlemen, speaking of reforms, I want to say thank you very much for really putting together, a really good laundry list and panoply of reforms that all boil down really to investor confidence in the long term and citizen resilience as immediate as now. It's certainly a clarion call, but it's also a roadmap. But with all roadmaps, in the spirit of Arangkada, it's always time to start building the road, and there's no better time to do it than now. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights, your time, and your commitment to the country. And we thank you, the audience, for your attention and your questions. With that, I turn it back to Bea. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm not Bea. I'm her mom. This is Monette Hamlin.
Hi, Monette. Apologies.
Hi. No, I just came from the National Roadmap for Global Competitiveness of Communication Skills that's being done by the Commission on Higher Education right now. So the country is actually taking a look at how we can improve the curriculum to arrest the decline of the English proficiency, realizing that this is just one of the many competitive advantages of the Philippines. So I'm back to my duties. But thank you all for the panel that just gave their very, very rich insights and recommendations on how the country can compete better. That's what we need. And now, to move on with the program, I would like to introduce our next speaker. For a special speech on supply chains and investment promotions, let me call on the Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Eb Hinchcliffe.
Thank you, Monette, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Joint Foreign Chambers, I'd just like to say, the warmest appreciation for that excellent talk given by Undersecretary Perry Rodolfo. It was very timely. I think also we have the excellent panel. It was really a superb discussion that came out of that. So thank you, Director General Bajica, Bill Luce, Peter, Toti, and have to say thanks to a great job by Quentin for the moderating. Good job, Quentin. My name is Eb Hinchcliffe. I'm the Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce, and which is a great. I spent 3 decades working in manufacturing in Asia, so I have a pretty good understanding of what the importance of the supply chain is to a company. I had the opportunity to open up the first joint venture in Jiangsu province, China, in 1986, Nanjing, China. Then I had worked with Texas Instruments and their manufacturing facilities in Taipei and Kuala Lumpur. And then, of course, I managed a pump company here in the Philippines, manufacturing locally. So the American Chamber is always supportive of bringing more U.S. companies to manufacturing companies to the Philippines. We're not looking to take away jobs in America by no means, but what we do, but if a company's already here, company's already producing in Asia or foreign country, and they want to expand, we're certainly here to do our best to make it happen in the Philippines. Our next speaker is going to update us what's happening in this ever-shifting supply chain in Asia. It's and some of the thoughts on how the Philippines can best persuade others to come in and do business here. Senior economist Frias joins us, I think, from Washington, D.C. this morning. He works at the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group and is with projects in various different countries, including the Philippines. And he leads it in innovation and competitiveness. His experience is work experience. He worked in his home country of Chile. He's worked with South America, Central America, Europe, Eastern Europe, East Asia, and has also been advising some for the Philippine government. But before I invite Mr. Frias to join us, let me first remind you of some of the upcoming sessions for the day. Right after, we'll be giving out our Arangkada 8th Arangkada Lifetime Achievement Award. That will be presented, the ceremony will be conducted by PAMRI's President, Evelyn Ng. And then we'll go into our midday breakouts, and these are really good. The one that I had the privilege of seeing, and John mentioned earlier, was the MAP Man of the Year award was to Federico Lopez, and he gave a really excellent speech. I was very impressed with his love of the environment, dedication to protect it. Other breakout sessions was a replay of yesterday's, press conference. We also have the Board of Investments on their Make It Philippines. Replay of that is excellent. You need to see it if you haven't already. And finally, the fourth breakout is an excellent session with, it's a new book by a friend of ours, Mr. Murray Hebert, dealing with the topic of the book is Under Beijing's Shadow, and it deals with the ever-growing, increasing activity and influence of China and ASEAN, and he does it by country. So that's an excellent book review. I hope you'll join us for that in our breakout session. But now, join me in welcoming our speaker, Mr. Jaime Frias. Invite him now to join us on our virtual stage. Mr. Frias.
On the screen. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for extending the invitation to me. Grateful to John, who reached out to me first. Thank you, Eb Hinchliffe, for that nice introduction from your side. I first of all also like to apologize. I wasn't able to join the previous session, but I want to thank also Yusek Perry for his leadership and from the address, and I managed to join at the end, so it was a fascinating discussion. Second, I would like to perhaps put a little disclaimer there that I'm not a trade economist, and my background, as Ed indicated, is more on the innovation policy side, and my experience, although I have worked in the Philippines, it's quite limited. My future position, I'm actually moving to the Philippines next summer. Hopefully I would start going there starting in January, and I'm really, really looking forward to learn more, but I thought that this was a great opportunity for me to get immersed into the topic in the Philippines, and I hope that the presentation will make justice to that. So if we can go to slide 2, Bea, please. So very briefly, I want to make a reference of presentation. First of all, general thoughts about how this COVID pandemic outbreak, has accelerated and perhaps amplified some of these structural trends that are affecting global value chains. Second, I would like to proceed to perhaps make a brief reference to regional trade integration opportunities, and perhaps, to understand how the Philippines can take advantage of that. Then I would like to stop briefly to discuss some of the challenges that, come greatly from some of the publications my colleague have made. And finally, I'd like to spend some time, perhaps describing a bit of a framework to try to see policy instruments, and perhaps also describe some of the work that we intend to do in the Philippines over the next calendar year. If we can go to the next slide, please. Wonderful. So this is essentially summarizing, and I think here I curated a few of these mega trends that have been impacted or somewhat affected by the COVID outbreak, right? So the first one relates to technology and the way that some of these global value chains are managing risk, gaining visibility by adopting digital technology. I was able to pull up some information from a multinational company survey done by the bank, where you can see that about half of the companies have recently reported to make adjustments and invest in digital technology. The second trend that I think is also affected not only by the COVID outbreak, by recessions more generally, is this issue of market concentration. And you can see that typically, for example, bringing here the empirical evidence from the United States, that over past recessions, the share prices tend to increase for the top quintile of the distribution and tend to decrease for the bottom companies in the distribution. The third element is something that probably comes natural to some of the colleagues and some of the attendants, is this issue of economic nationalism that is perhaps greatly related to the issue of political polarization and inequality. But the pandemic has somewhat accentuated protectionism policies and some instincts that perhaps try to enhance that economic nationalism. The third, the fourth interesting structural trend is this issue of multinational companies from developing countries that are actually gaining more prominence in the share of foreign ODI. And here we can see how BRIC countries have taken the lead on that. And finally, something that perhaps affects mostly the Philippines manufacturing sector is this issue about related to automation and the advent of disruptive technologies, right? That is really challenging perhaps the more traditional sort of model of low-cost based manufacturing. And we've seen that actually some of my colleagues, Gaurav with Mary, recently had done some analysis about trends of reshoring, and they have seen some evidence of that, reshoring to developed countries, of course, but that is really, really small at this point, but it's something that I think is worth to watch for. Perhaps let us look a little bit at the regional trade context over the next slide, please, Bea. So on the left-hand side, this is essentially showing a little bit of how deepening trade integration, perhaps related to the trade tensions between the United States and China, can bring opportunities to ASEAN countries and the Philippines. So the chart on the left actually shows the share of trade between several economies and China since the 2000. The orange line represents ASEAN economies, and we can see how increasing market share has taken place over the last 20 years, with ASEAN becoming perhaps one of the largest trading partner of China in 2020. Also, the implementation of RCEP and CPTPP, is expected to deepen trade integration, but the uncertainty perhaps whether India and the United States are gonna join these agreements remains. This is something also that it's worth to keep an eye on. And then I want to perhaps show you in the next slide, please. This is just a reference, and it takes a little bit of information from manufacturing trade imports to the United States from countries in Asia, and you've seen how the trade war has actually affected, by reducing imports from China, but actually on the net, I think imports from the region have increased. I think in the last year of measure, about $31 billion basically, was the net gain from the countries in the region, of course, non-China countries. And we see though that the lion's share of these gains have been accrued to Vietnam, which has almost gotten half of that net gain on non-China ASEAN countries. You can see, of course, that Philippines has not been able to really tap into this opportunity. The Philippines is part of that dark, block at the bottom in others, where it's only 8% of that net gain of $31 billion. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now here, what I wanted to do is to highlight some of the structural issues that perhaps were there even before the pandemic. And I have to apologize here because this data is the latest that I had. It's quite, old, but I don't think this change, these, structural issues can change so dramatically from year to year. But you can see that even before the outbreak, Philippines was already shifting a little bit away from, some of what we can call sophisticated product exports. And to a certain extent, we can say that it was unable to leverage the full benefits of participation on GVCs. The chart on the left shows actually the export classification according to technology. And you can see that between 2000 and 2013, the share of high-tech exports decreased from 71 to 61%. During that time also, the World Bank report from our colleagues actually is from 2017 and 2018, concluded that to a certain extent, the Philippines or the Philippines exports was drifting away from, its strategic. This was an analysis of the product space, and that, for the level of sophistication, the income per capita in the Philippines wasn't as high, meaning essentially that, the Philippines has still to take advantage of the full benefits of participating in GVC. Let me go to the next slide, please. Now, the next slide actually shows, the sort of, integration on GVCs by industry on the chart on the left. And we can see that the degree of integration, forward and backward linkages varies greatly across industries. Of course, electronics probably is the industry with the sort of, the deeper integration. But we can see also that, the enterprise survey, I mean, this is also from the same report that I was quoting, show that the direct and indirect exports from the Philippines was low, compared to, or the prevalence of firms that were directly or indirectly exporting was low when compared to regional countries. And at the same time, I guess this is no news for anyone, that the FDI inflows as a percentage of output of the Philippines is relatively low when compared to, the regional countries. So here, perhaps the next slide can give us a little bit of an insight on one of the, perhaps the constraints that is limiting somewhat the participation of Philippine firms in GVCs. This is a recent study by Mendoza that suggests that it is actually the lack of product innovation that is leading to the Philippines specializing perhaps not in the highest sort of, echelons or segments of supply in these value chains. Essentially, the researcher found that, the Philippines Philippine firms were conducting primarily process innovation and technological innovation, and manufacturers probably, relied mostly on external sources of knowledge, meaning, that R&D levels is lower than you would expect for the type of industries that, are in the Philippines. So just to be clear, the chart on the left shows the determinants of technological process and product innovation. And you can see basically that technology and process innovation show higher estimation coefficients, for some of these determinants related to acquisition of equipment and so on. Next slide, please. So the next one actually makes emphasis on some of the strengths that the Philippines have in the service sector. Basically, the chart on the left actually goes back to this issue of integration, forward and backward linkages, and it really looks at the progression perhaps of linkages over time, where you can see that in 2011, the level of integration was increasing significantly, driven by the BPO sector. But the issue here is that in spite of that, strength, the level of certification of manufacturing is relative. This was one of the main conclusions of that report, which is, we know that certification and the bundling of services in manufacturing is a very strong determinant of competitiveness and for FDI attraction. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just to basically draw some of implications or conclusions out of these, the preceding slides, I think, perhaps the Philippines, should focus on linking more strongly services with other sort of sectors such as manufacturing, and perhaps use that as a way of diversifying the export base of services from BPOs, and at the same competitiveness of manufacturing exports. Secondly, the issue of promoting adoption of technology, and in particular, perhaps thinking how that can influence product innovation. Product innovation, just to be clear, is more sophisticated than process innovation. At least this is what the literature tells us. And the idea would be perhaps to use sort of policies or think about ways in which innovation could be driving increases of integration of GVC, Philippine firms in GVCs. The third one is perhaps to really think a little bit how to really take advantage of the sort of reconfiguration of value chains driven by COVID and the trade tensions between the United States and China, and really perhaps position the Philippines as a complement to China, perhaps focusing on niches that the Philippines can compete. Perhaps I heard the discussants earlier discussing about skills, right? Skills is a fundamental factor for competing on knowledge sectors, and thinking a little bit how the Philippines can compete and differentiate from perhaps the massive low-cost sort of model that China can bring, would be one of the elements. The sort of fourth element is to advance structural reforms, and perhaps this is something that you already addressed in the previous one, and it might be obvious, and it perhaps is related to my next point, which is actually thinking a bit about the digital infrastructure. This is also something I heard from the discussants on the previous section, and thinking some of the issues that might be preventing services. That was one of the key highlights from the report of the bank in 2018, and thinking a little bit how perhaps improving competition, and some of the other sort of more business sort of related to the business environment policies can increase the attractiveness of the Philippines for a high quality FDI. Let me go to the next slide very briefly. This is I'm getting to the end here, so I hope it's insightful for you as well. This is actually coming, it's a forthcoming publication from our colleagues that are looking at the issue of supply chains and FDI attraction. And the diagram on the left actually shows, the different players on GVCs, highlighting the roles of MNCs, domestic firms and policymakers. And the boxes at the bottom actually present, an array of policy domains, really thinking, the array of policies that are typically used for attracting investment and assisting perhaps domestic firms to increase their own capabilities and become integrated in GVCs in a way that is successful and competitive. Perhaps I wanted to summarize a few messages from the literature that indicates, for example, that investment decisions are usually not driven by incentives, but they can play a role at the margin. And perhaps this is very relevant. I know that last week, it was passed the recent bill, Sitara and Create. So I know that this is a very, very strong point, perhaps for the discussants and the audience of this presentation. But at the end of the day, context matters, right? I mean, yes, it's true that at the margin it can make a difference, but in general, the evidence or our experience at the bank shows that there are other elements that tend to be more important. For example, investment protection, the level of competition, access to skills, coming back to the issue of skills in the labor pool or the labor force, and so on. Infrastructure might be another. And perhaps even the access in the ecosystem, if you are thinking of innovation, the quality of universities, the level of technology extension and technology transfers, and so on. So the second point I wanted to bring is that although that there is scant evidence, it seems that supplier development policies, here again, perhaps looking at the set of boxes on the right-hand side at the bottom of the diagram, the ones that really can help perhaps, firms to, increase capacity to become better suppliers to, foreign companies, tend to work. We have evidence from two programs, one in Chile, my home country, and another one from Costa Rica. I think that there is also ample evidence from the Czech Republic program in the, in the OECD region that, these programs tend to be relatively successful on creating employment, increasing revenues, increasing wages for the workers on these companies, and even increasing the survival of some of the suppliers in those value chains. And my last point, I think, on this slide is related to export promotion agencies. This is something perhaps, I don't know if it is part of the focus of this discussion, but it seems that the evidence suggests that these tend to be good investments in general. So I just wanted to park there. And perhaps the last slide is to very briefly show you working on this space. On the left-hand side, we can show that, these are generally the areas or the pillars that, we usually tend to address. And on the right-hand side are examples of our plan here for the Philippines. Some of them might fall in the realm of trade integration, some of the other ones on trade investment attraction policy, and some of the other ones perhaps on supplier development programs. So let me stop here and perhaps open the floor for reactions or questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frias, for sharing with us that very informative study and on the GBC and how we can use that to really attract FDIs. We know there's a lot of things that we need to do, and your recommendations on what policies we can try to put in would really, really help the country. For those of you who have any questions, kindly just put it into the chat box, and we will make sure that they get to Mr. Jaime Frias, and he can respond to them later. In the interest of time, we will be going straight to the next part of our presentation for today at the 9th Arangkada Philippines Forum. And now we're going to have that most awaited announcement, the Arangkada Lifetime Achievement, and to introduce the recipient of this year's Arangkada Lifetime Achievement Award. May I call on the President of the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters, Inc., Ms. Evelyn Ng.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. I trust you are all staying safe. I hope you agree that this morning's speeches and panel discussion were extremely informative. The campaign to be more competitive is one of the most important of these times. It can support economic recovery and accelerate new FDI and job creation. I thank senior economist Jamie Frias from the World Bank in Washington for sharing his valuable perspective. My name is Evelyn Shuanang. I am president of the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters, Inc., or PAMURI. We represent regional operating headquarters and regional area headquarters in the country who provide management support to parent companies and affiliates globally. bringing in substantial inward remittances and providing many well-paying jobs to Filipinos. From the industry's inception in the year 2000, following the signing of the Republic Act number 8756, the industry has attracted a substantial number of ROHQs and RHQs from Fortune 500 companies. This was possible because of the sustained efforts of the government and our chamber to attract multinational companies to relocate in the Philippines. We look forward to continued support from the government in promoting the Philippines as a destination for global business services or regional operations. In my day job, I am also Vice President, Controller of Procter & Gamble Regional Operations, where I am responsible for controllership in more than 100 countries, including China. Q is proud to have a large complement of over 1,000 high-performing Filipinos, the majority of whom are serving in highly technical and managerial roles. It is my honor today to announce the 8th recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Joint Foreign Chambers. In 2013, the Joint Foreign Chambers decided to present this prestigious award to a distinguished person, and I quote from the award presentation trophy. In recognition of the outstanding contributions and superb leadership over several decades to achieving highly significant and lasting institutional and policy reforms of long-term benefit to the people and economy of the Republic of the Philippines. We have given this award annually for the last 7 years to 7 Filipinos who truly met the quote I just read. Former President Fidel V. Ramos, the late business leader Washington Sisip, the late Senator Edgardo Angara, who are not with us today, and former Foreign Secretary Roberto Romulo, former Foreign Secretary Delia Albert, former PESA Director General Lilia de Lima, and former BSD Governor Sai Tatanco, whom we are very honored to have with us today. To these friends of the JFC and the Arangkada project, we thank you for joining us and thank you for your lifetime contributions to the Philippines. We are honored today to recognize as our 8th recipient, Mr. Peter Wallace, Chairman of the Wallace Business Forum, author of the popular Like It Is column in the Philippine Daily Inquirer newspaper, and perhaps the most influential long-term foreign resident in this country. I should qualify foreign in Peter's case, since a few years ago, he was awarded Philippine citizenship, making him a dual citizen of the Philippines and Australia. Mr. Wallace is a native of Sydney, who like many foreigners set down roots in the Philippines, married a lovely and vivacious lady from Baguio, Este Rivera, and decided to make his home here for the last 45 years. Peter is extremely well known in business and government circles, including by presidents of the Philippines. Since 1986, Peter has advised 5 of the last 6 presidents, including the incumbent. Through the memos he sends them, presidents have for over 3 decades received sound ideas about policies that are good for private sector investment and job creation and good for the Philippines. Mr. Wallace's consulting firms have occupied the top position in their sector for the last 3 decades. They have advised and consulted for hundreds of Filipino and foreign businesses, including the country's largest corporations, many embassies, and international development agencies. Peter's firms provide copious information about business conditions, the economy, political developments, legislation and rules, and investment opportunities. Many corporate leaders begin their week with an update from Peter Wallace. Peter's quarterly briefings are attended by top corporations. Always held in a hotel ballroom, Peter first provides his comprehensive economic and political briefing, then followed by a cabinet secretary or other special guests to explain policies and to dialogue Wallace Business Forum members. Peter is extremely well informed and imparts his wealth of knowledge from decades of working with successive administrations and immersion in the private sector. Due to his efforts, government officials better understand the perspective of the foreign business community, and the foreign business community in turn better understands policies and projects of the government. Peter has the discipline to write a weekly column that is intelligent, relevant, and very sensible. He started writing columns 3 decades ago for the Manila Standard, then moved to the Philippine Daily Inquirer and has published over 1,000 columns. If there is one dominant theme for them, it is always his passion for the Philippines to become a highly developed country where all are well off. He's a crusader for policies that support this passion. In fact, his column this morning is about modernizing our public hospitals and health infrastructure with the help of the private sector, with timely and relevant recommendations on the aggressive implementation of public-private partnership in the health sector. Peter has held leadership positions over the years in leading business chambers as president of the Australian Chamber of Commerce for over a decade, and on the boards of the Management Association of the Philippines and the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines for similar long periods. More recently, Peter was appointed to the Ease of Doing Business and the Anti-Red Tape Advisory Council of the ARTA as private sector representative. Here, he can bring his passion against unreasonable bureaucracy to practical effect. So Peter meets all the criteria of our award. In recognition of outstanding contributions and superb leadership over several decades, highly significant and lasting institutional and policy reforms of long-term benefit to the people and economy of the Republic of the Philippines. We award the Arangkada Lifetime Achievement Award. I ask the JFC president to join me on stage. Mr. Wallace, please join us as well.
Am I there?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay.
I think Peter will now, Mr. Wallace will now deliver his acceptance remarks.
Thanks, Evelyn. I must admit, I'm overwhelmed. I certainly didn't expect this. It's very kind of you. I really am quite amazed. It's a lifetime award, so I have to wonder, is that the lifetime I've had or the one I'm yet to have? Because if it's the one I've had, it's a long one. If it's the one I'm about to have, it's a rather short one. So I hope it's for what I've done rather than what I'm still going to do, because I'm not going to give up, that's for sure. I think that what we've achieved in this country over the last 4.5 decades that I've been here has been remarkable. The interaction between government is closer today than it was when I first came here by a long way, and particularly of acceptance of foreign business, where it was very suspicious when we started back in the 80s, the 70s, is now well accepted by everyone. It's been a lifetime of 45 years here. It is a lifetime. For my son, who's 38, it's more than a lifetime. And no, he wasn't born out of wedlock. My wife, Esty, can certainly assure you we were well married before we had Struan. It's been a rewarding 45 years. It's been full of experiences I think few are lucky enough to enjoy. From the numerous business activities and to sailing oceans with Esty, we had a yacht built in Japan. We sailed it together with a crew to the Philippines, 17 days of storms. We've been to Hong Kong and back many times. And we've taken the kids on boats. Our kids grew up on our yachts, sailing around the Philippines. You can throw a decade of motor racing into it in my madcap youth, where I raced on Australian motor circuits quite successfully. But what's truly made it for me in this lifetime is all the friends that I've garnered. And many of them, I guess, are here today, although visually I have no idea how we can tell. But hi to you all if you are here today. I'm an engineer, so when I came here, it was to build a factory. It's the most satisfying thing to do as an engineer, to start with a blank piece of ground and end up with products coming out of a factory. And I certainly found it very fulfilling. And I went on to run a couple of other factories after that, a rope factory down in Davao being one of them. And that was an interesting experience being so far away. And I've started my own business. And I think many of us would like to do that. And it's a risky thing to do. But once you've done it, it's a great experience. The 38 years of the Wallace Business Forum have been immensely satisfying to me. As Evelyn said, I've probably written over 1,000 columns, and how many, goodness knows, technical reports as well. But you know, I'll never forget my first year in university, because my background and interest is basically engineering, mathematics, and so on. And I went up to the English professor and I said, "We did that at school, that's surely enough." And he said, I quote, "Mr. Wallace, if, and I stress if, you ever become an engineer, you'll have to be able to write reports, so we're going to teach you to write reports." That's all I do now, write reports. Except I do have an extensive workshop, probably the best private workshop in the country. And I thoroughly enjoy tinkering around there on the weekends, building things, fixing things, creating things. But it's the writing which is fascinating. And looking back in my family history, I find that several of my great-grandparents and great-grandparents were also writers. So perhaps it's a genetic thing that I have in me. The JFC is a baby I've nurtured from the early days in Amsterdam. I believed in, and I believe it has been very successful. It has helped successive governments and understanding what the private sector needs, what the foreign private sector needs, and the private sector needs, as Evelyn pointed out, what government can provide. And I think we've got a better environment, a better working environment between the two groups over the many years. I think the way we've been able to interact with government and the Philippine chambers, where together with the Philippine chambers, we've taken common stands on many issues important to us into Congress and into the administration, and with considerable success. I think that the joint actions have been a major development in working together. Being able to get, as we have, up to 17 different chambers all to agree on one thing is a remarkable thing. And I think that is great. I believe John has done a great job with Arangkada in helping this group with the research and inputs that have given us more technical advantage and capability over the years. So Arangkada has been a very positive influence and help to the Joint Foreign Chambers. So I think the bottom line of all of this is that we've achieved positive improvements in the business environment for foreigners and Filipinos. Well, for this unexpected honor, I still can't quite believe it. I'll treasure it. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, Peter, you really so richly deserve this award. So congratulations once again. Please stay on stream because as of now, I would like to call on representatives from the Joint Foreign Chambers Association Philippines to join you in a photo op for this momentous occasion. So may I call on Eb Hinchcliffe of AmCham, Maricar Gonzalez of ANSCHAM, the Australia-New Zealand Chamber, Mr. Hoy Lee from the Korean Chamber, Ms. Evelyn Nung, Celeste Ilagan, and Mimi Lopez Malvar, all from Pamuri, and of course our beloved John Ford. So please all turn on your videos now so that you can join the photo. Okay, please smile and please remove your mask so we can see you smiling, John. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Now that's a great shot. Let me just make sure that we got it again in case anyone blinked. 1, 2, 3. Great, awesome. So thank you very much and congratulations again to Peter Wallace for that richly deserved award. And now we'd like to encourage everyone to please join the midday breakout sessions that will be starting in a few minutes. These breakout sessions, you all know by now, in a different link. So please head off. You'll have to get off this link to get to that, but you also need to register first. So let me just give you a quick reminder of what those midday breakout sessions are. At 12 noon, We will have the playback of Mr. Federico Lopez's speech at the Management Associate of the Philippines Man of the Year Awarding 2020. And virtual room B, we will have the playback of the press conference on the third quarter performance of the Philippine economy. At 12:45 at virtual room A, we will have the playback of Under Beijing Shadow, Southeast Asia's China Challenge book discussion. And at virtual room B, we will have a briefing on the tourism department's Make It Happen. The DTI's Make It Happen in the Philippines campaign. After attending all of those wonderful breakout sessions, please do not forget to log back here at this main webinar link for the continuation of our forum. We will start the afternoon session at exactly 1:30 p.m. So please be here 5 minutes early. And please do tweet about the event hashtag Arangkada Forum 2020. We also invite you to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com Arangkada Philippines. Follow us on Twitter at Arangkada PH. And of course, please do connect with us on LinkedIn by looking for Arangkada Philippines. So for now, please enjoy your lunch and go to those midday sessions. Congratulations again, Peter. We love you.
Thank you. Thank Mom. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Congrats, Peter.
Thanks.